In this video, we're going to look at how Paul George got his groove back in a stunning Game 5 performance. We start off very early in the first quarter, handoff to Kawhi Leonard. Paul George is going to clear out along the wing and receive a mini flare screen from Ivica Zubac. We actually saw them run this play in the second quarter and to open the third quarter, resulted in an alley-oop. Here, George acts like he's going to screen Morris's man, which is Luka Doncic. As Morris clears out, George comes off of a Zubac pin down. Now, normally he can get an open three, but Tim Hardaway Jr. gets around the screen. And here, Paul George creates a little bit of separation with his arm, but he doesn't fully extend, so it's not a foul. He then steps back to generate separation, and this is a solid contest. However, George is long enough and a good enough shooter to knock this one down. Paul George isn't a great post player, but he is an adequate one. Here, he gets into the body of Tim Hardaway Jr., and he posts up here in the mid-post, and he bangs him again, and this is to let Tim Hardaway Jr. think that he's going to turn at a time that he's not ready. This little subtle move to the right gets Hardaway Jr. to lean the wrong way, and George then uses his elbow into the stomach of Hardaway to create separation. He leans back, and as he fades, there's no contest of the shot, and he gets a friendly bounce, but these still matter. Even when you initially miss, you can have good process. Here, Paul George is going to drive against Maxi Kleber. He gets into his body, which is good. However, when he goes up, Kleber actually contests this perfectly. Maxi Kleber is a heck of a defender, contested perfectly, and as the ball comes off, Paul George stays with this. He gets a hand on the ball to dislodge it, and in doing so, he saves it, and he's going to save it back to Kawhi Leonard, who then passes it back to George in the corner. But because of George's proficiency as a triple threat option, look at how they have to respect him here, and they overplay on him possibly taking the three, so George is able to get down the baseline, creates a little separation with his shoulder to knock the hand away, pump fakes to draw the defense up in the air, and then he finishes through that with a nice little layup attempt. Paul George really brought out the bag early on in Game 5. A favorite of Paul George's is early transition threes. Here, he spots that his defender is Luka Doncic. Doncic knows that George can drive, so George uses this to his advantage and starts to decelerate. He then hops into his shot motion, but look how far Doncic is. So when the shot goes up, it's a decent contest, but it's not great. George gets a clean look, and he knocks it in. Due to his length and fluidity, Paul George is really good attacking downhill. Here, Montrezl Harrell sets a screen against Maxi Kleber. This allows Paul George to get downhill against Boban. Look at Boban, his feet are parallel. He's not going to be able to stop this. George then takes a right-footed step as his gather, then comes down with his left foot. This one long step creates a space that allows him to get this layup attempt off, and he puts it up and in. This is tremendous. Finding ways to use Paul George off the ball is something the Clippers need to do more of. We always think of him as a great scorer, but what he is more than anything is a great shooter. And on this play, we're actually going to see how his shooting dictates everything. Here, he hard plants with his left foot. The defender is going to overplay the handoff, and in doing so, this little pass back to Paul George, right back into the mid-range area. He has an open mid-range shot. He gets good elevation. The ball comes perfectly off of his guide hand. He bangs it in. This is just flawless. Let's watch Paul George make someone dance. Defended by Dorian Finney-Smith. He begins his crossover with the ball in his left hand, crosses right, gets the defender leading, hard plants left, comes back. Now he's coming across against the Ivica Zubac screen against drop coverage, and just watch at the space that's generated here on this jumper. There's no defender in front of him. It's a clean look, nothing but net. This play is going to look a little familiar. It was a little bit earlier in the video, but here, Paul George is going to end up pointing to Kawhi Leonard. Buddy, you're on the wrong side of the floor. Come back to this side. Kawhi comes back to that side of the floor, and in doing so, Paul George slips a little screen, and because of this, he's going to come down off of an Ivica Zubac flare screen. So everyone on Dallas thinks this was going to be a three ball, but instead, George cuts. And look at this Kawhi Leonard one-handed pass perfectly to Paul George, who leaps, catches it, and he lays it in. The Clippers got Paul George involved really well. Sometimes you just forget how easy Paul George can make everything look. Here, he gets the ball, and in front of him is Maxi Kleber, who is a good defender, but no match for Paul George and his fluidity. George hard plants with his right foot. This is going to drive Kleber back. Look at the hop that Kleber has to go into. Look at the space that's generated. As Paul George goes up, Kleber tries to get back in the play to contest, but it's too late, and Paul George knocks it down. Paul George in the mid-post is something the Clippers are trying to exploit more and more. When he catches the ball here, I want you to look at how he's then going to bend his body back to put weight onto Tim Hardaway Jr. He then is going to read that Hardaway Jr. is pushing against him, spins off of that, uses Hardaway's momentum against him, gets downhill, right against Maxi Kleber, draws the flagrant foul, George really was in another zone. Side out of bounds after that last play. Paul George is going to get the ball, come immediately off of an Ivica Zubac screen. Look at how crushing that screen is. He's going to turn downhill. Well, Maxi Kleber jumps out thinking he might pull up in the mid-range again. Because of this, George has the advantage. He hard plants right as he hop steps into his gather, and in doing so, he draws a foul and gets 2 more free throws, and he's just on a roll. This final play is what I talk about when I say Paul George downhill is dangerous. Look at this screen by Montrezl Harrell. It springs him. Now it's only Boban Marjanovic back, and Boban's not going to be any kind of threat to stop George. He even tries to take a charge, but George hard plants left, goes right, plants with his left, and in doing so, he extends into a hop step, gets Boban to kind of bite on this little shot fake, and in doing so, Paul George draws the foul and gets the layup. This was an exquisite performance from opening to end for Paul George.